Good morning, good morning. I'll get the boring stuff out of the way first, okay? Just to give you a little bit of background of how I ended up at the Dayton Daily News. I had the tremendous misfortune of growing up in Beaver Creek, Ohio. Back then there were two Fairmonts, Fairmont East and Fairmont West. Some of your parents may have been familiar with that phenomenon. But I went to, first of all, I had no idea what I wanted to do when I was in high school. I had no idea what I wanted to do for a living. When I took the ACTs, I scored highest in math and lowest in English. And look at what I've done for the last 35 years. I've been a journalist writing stories every day. So there's no particular message there for anybody, because some of you may have a laser-like focus on what you want to do. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I enrolled at Ohio State University. Back then it was just Ohio State University and not the Ohio State University. They actually literally changed their name at some point to add the. And they were not this elite school back then. They pretty much let anybody in if you could breathe into a mirror and show some fog there. They let you in. So they also had a pretty decent journalism program, and I took a couple of journalism courses in my freshman and sophomore year, and sort of caught the bug a little bit. I started working on the school paper there. You folks have a school newspaper here that I think is that entirely online now, or the school paper here? Yeah. Okay. Ohio State had at that time a daily newspaper, at least weekdays, Monday through Friday. And I started working on the Lantern, which was the name of the school paper at Ohio State. And things started to come into focus for me a little bit, because I started enjoying what I was doing there. And I determined that if I was going to make a living at writing, it was probably not going to be sitting around writing novels. It was going to be working for a newspaper. So I enrolled all the way into the journalism program, jumped in with both feet, and graduated from Ohio. It took me 5 years to get my 4-year degree, I'm proud to say, not the least bit ashamed to say. Ended up working quite a bit on the school paper, and ended up a couple of semesters dropping all my classes entirely to work on the school newspaper, which I don't think was technically allowed. I think I was supposed to be a student but you know, I kept my classes until halfway through the quarter and then dropped. So when I got out of Ohio State with a journalism degree, I was desperate for a job, and it didn't matter whether it was in Dayton, Ohio or not. And so I was applying everywhere across the state and beyond. I did get a job at a very small newspaper up near Toledo. It's called, in Fremont, Ohio. It's an exit off the turnpike if anybody's been up to Northwest Ohio. There's a paper up there called the News Messenger, the News-Messenger. So naturally its nickname was the News Mess, right? That's what everybody in town called it, because you know, people usually don't have good things to say about their own hometown paper. Fremont was no exception. But I got a job up there, and I covered the county courts, county government, and several other things. This town was about the size of Xenia, Troy. You know, those cities have small newspapers too. Those papers are still around. Kettering used to have the Kettering Oakwood Times not too many years ago. Some of you may remember it. It went out of business just a few years ago. But this was a small paper in which there were only 3 or 4 reporters, and we covered just about everything. But it was really quite an introduction to journalism, because you know, covering county courts, there were multiple murder trials that were some of them pretty sensational, salacious, and kind of crazy, and I was writing stories that people in that community really cared about. Our newspaper came out about noontime every day. It was an afternoon paper, so I could write a story that morning, and in the afternoon I could go out for a late lunch, and I could sit around in a diner somewhere, and I could watch people reading my story, and I could listen to them talking to each other about it. Oh my gosh, look what happened to this murder trial today, or something like that. And that was that is an ego. It's an ego thing, but it became very gratifying. So I spent almost 3 years up there working at this small paper, and then there was an opening at the Dayton Daily News, and I had sort of kept in touch with my friends in Dayton and the editors in Dayton, and so I ended up getting a job. I worked out of a small office in Xenia. I was not working in Dayton along with all of my other fellow reporters, but at that time we had what were called bureaus, and there aren't too many of them left anymore, a victim of downsizing that we'll talk about later. But we had bureau offices in Xenia, in Troy, down in Lebanon in Warren County, covering those communities, you know, from those offices as opposed to trying to cover them by phone from downtown Dayton. So again, I was covering courts in Greene County, and once again, for the next 3 years that I was there, there were all kinds of really sensational crime stories and trials and murder trials and death penalty murder trials and cases, and they also and my editors sent me to cover some additional cases outside of Dayton that were fascinating to write about. Later on, if you'd like, we'll talk about a trial that I covered in Logan, Ohio, down in southeast Ohio, in which someone was convicted of murder and sentenced to death, and before that person went to the electric chair, he was exonerated. It was determined that he was wrongly convicted, and 2 other people, one of whom confessed to the crime, were convicted and thrown in jail instead. So it was to watch a trial in which someone is sentenced to die, and it turns out that that was an innocent, totally innocent person, that was like having a front row seat to what felt like almost a historic kind of event. So those things sort of feed the desire to be a journalist. And so eventually I was transferred out of that Xenia office, and I was no longer covering Greene County anymore. And I came to the downtown Dayton office at that time and started covering higher education, including Sinclair. But I wrote, for about 15 years, I covered the colleges and universities in this town, and there are, I mean, we are in the center of really a hotbed of colleges and universities, more so than any other region in Ohio. We've got 3 big ones in town here: Sinclair, obviously, University of Dayton, and Wright State. UD's private and Catholic. Sinclair is a 2-year school, community college. Wright State's a 4-year public university. And in Greene County alone has 5 colleges and universities. Wright State is one of them. It's technically over. It's not in Dayton. It's in Fairborn. So that's one of. But who can name the other 4 schools in colleges and universities in Greene County? Give it a try. Yeah.
Clark State?
No, that's in Clark County. So there are 4 other ones in Greene County. It's the area around Xenia, roughly. But Clark's a little bit north of there. Go ahead.
Did you say Bowling Green?
No, Bowling Green's a
Yes,
couple
that's
hours
2
to the
hours.
north. Yeah, that's up in.
Around Xenia or in Xenia?
Well, you tell me. There are.
My dad went to the college in Xenia, so does that count?
Central State.
Sure does. Which one?
Yeah, Central State.
Central State. Yep. It's in the community of Wilberforce, just on the other side of Xenia, but Xenia's close enough. Yep. Central State's one of them, and right across from Central State is Wilberforce University. Those are both historically black schools. Central State is public, which means it receives tax money from the state of Ohio. Wilberforce is not public. It's a private school, so it does not receive tax money support from the state of Ohio. And those are 2 right across the street from each other. Wilberforce goes back to 1856, before the Civil War. It is the oldest private, historically black college in the nation. It is, and it's right there and right across the street. And Central State actually was a part of Wilberforce initially and then sort of branched off from it. That's 2 of them. There are 2 more. 2 more that are as different as this end of the spectrum and that end of the spectrum, and they're very close to each other out in Greene County. One of them is Antioch College, which just recently came back to life after a couple of years of not being around at all. And then there's Cedarville University, formerly Cedarville College, which is right next door. So those are the other 4. Very, very different schools. Yes, Cedarville University is affiliated with the Baptist Church, and it prides itself on being a very conservative and religiously dominated school. Antioch is none of those things, just quite frankly. And so the two are very, very different. So, and we do, and in addition to that, there's Wittenberg University up in Springfield, Clark State, which is right up there next to Wittenberg. Miami University is not far away. Edison Community College, Wilmington College. I mean, this place, in terms of colleges and universities, you have your pick of any different stripe and color and size and everything else. So I got to know Mr. Hunnert quite well in his capacity as the PR guy or director of public information at Sinclair, and he would give me story tips all the time that generally would make Sinclair look good, the accomplishments of its faculty and staff and students, and new programs that are coming in, and new buildings being built, and enrollment records being set, and everything else was going on at Sinclair while he was there. There were all kinds of things going on at Sinclair. Occasionally, there were bad things that went on at Sinclair. You know, faculty members doing things they shouldn't, administrators doing things they shouldn't, presidents of the college doing things they shouldn't, and losing, you know. So we developed a relationship of mutual respect, and there were times when he did not want to hear my voice on the other end of the phone line, and yet he did. And so it's an interesting relationship that journalists have with those who are working in public relations and public information. We need each other, but we sometimes treat each other with a certain amount of lack of respect, let's say, sometimes, not often enough. Gary and I had an excellent relationship, and he was really good, much better than some of his counterparts at the other colleges and universities around Dayton. And I did that higher ed gig for about 15, 18 years, as a matter of fact. But after that, I did make a pretty big change within my field, within the journalism field, and within the Dayton Daily News. I went from one beat to another. Higher ed was my beat, so I had a concentration of attention and focus on the colleges and universities. That was my beat. But then my beat changed, and I became, for a few years, the food and dining reporter for the Dayton Daily News, which meant that I wrote about local restaurants. I sometimes reviewed those restaurants, would go in and eat a meal there and write about whether that meal was good or bad and the reasons why. I also wrote about wine for the paper. I actually started a wine column for the paper in 1989, and wrote that column until just a few years ago. And so, and those stories are very popular, and they carried a certain amount of responsibility. When you are reviewing, I mean, sometimes when you go to a business or a restaurant, you'll write reviews online, right? Or people you know do. They'll write Yelp. You've done some things on there, and you'll see some of these reviews that are very negative. And so when you're doing that for the Dayton Daily News, and you're writing about a locally owned restaurant and usually we did our reviews focusing on independently owned restaurants, not chain restaurants. There was really no sense in writing about the food at McDonald's or even Applebee's, because it's the same as every other Applebee's and every other McDonald's across the country. So we focused on locally owned, independently owned restaurants. And if we were to write, if I were to treat this job as simply, you know, not having any respect for the restaurants that I'm covering, and simply trying to write a funny or humorous review that might be really negative, that might talk about how horrible the food was and how bad the service was, people would lose their jobs. And in some cases, I could put a restaurant out of business entirely, and someone may have, it might have been their life's goal, their life's dream to open a restaurant. And I come in there and they have a bad day on a couple of days. We never just did it based on one meal, by the way. We went in 2 or 3 times, especially if the first time was not a positive experience. We gave them additional chances. So that was a responsibility that I took seriously, and everybody in journalism has to take seriously. It's not just about you. It's not just about how funny you can be in print. It's not about how trying to impress someone about how much you know about craft beer or chicken wings or chicken wing sauce or whatever, we had to have respect for what we were writing about because there is power behind the pen here, and a negative review in the Dayton Daily News could have a disastrous effect on a small independently owned restaurant. Most of the reviews that I wrote were generally positive. A couple of them were negative and were somewhat negative, but not in a sarcastic, cutting, withering sort of way, because I knew that if I wrote about bad service, that server would get fired. And maybe that server was just having a bad day. Maybe that server was up all night with a sick kid. Maybe that server had just been evicted from their apartment. And so if I went someplace and had one bad experience, I made sure to go back at least 2 more times, and usually I took one of my bosses with me. That's always a really good idea. If I'm going to write something bad, my boss better have my back on that one. So if I had a bad experience once, I usually dragged one of my bosses along to the next one to sort of say, okay, see, it really is bad. So when I write this bad review, you're going to understand why I'm writing it. And so when you get complaints from the community, you're at least going to know what's going on. At the same time I was reviewing these restaurants, I was also writing about the business aspect of these restaurants. When a new restaurant opens, everybody wants to know about it. When a restaurant closes, like unexpectedly sometimes, people want to know about that. When restaurant owners sue each other, that people want to know about that. When restaurant owners get indicted for multiple felony counts for crimes they've committed, people want to know about that. All of those things happened while I was covering that beat and while I was writing about restaurants, and continue to happen to this day. Those stories did very, very well online, and they also were very popular in print. But what we came to learn through this period was that the stories we wrote, the news-based stories that we wrote, not the reviews so much, but the news stories we wrote about restaurants coming and going, they got more page views online than the reviews that we were writing. That kind of surprised us. I mean, I thought, geez, I'm writing these reviews. Everybody thinks I'm a big expert about restaurants in town. Everybody just can't wait to read about the review that I wrote about the new restaurant that opened up last month. Not so much. I mean, they had a decent audience online, but in terms of these page clicks here, the page views, it was the stories about the new restaurants coming to town, restaurants closing, restaurant owners suing each other, restaurant owners getting charged with multiple crimes and going to prison for multiple years. Those were the stories that did much better online and had far more page views. And you know, early on in my career, I didn't know what a page view was. In fact, early on in my career, there was no such thing as a page view because there was no such thing as the internet. There was no such thing as logging onto the internet and reading any of these things. So what has happened in journalism, Gary mentioned the term convergence and downsizing. All those things have happened at the Dayton Daily News. Our staff now is about 1/3, maybe even less than 1/3 the size that it was 10, 15 years ago. That is a dramatic drop. Can you imagine losing 1/3 of the student body at Fairmont? This would be a different place. This would have a different feel to it with 2/3 of your colleagues gone. Your teacher to pupil ratio would be very small. You'd be in math class with like only 4 or 5, you know, six or eight other people, and the teacher would have lots of time to give you very personal attention. Careful what you wish for, right? Okay, so this idea of convergence has happened in Dayton in a very big way, and in every other city in the United States. Newspapers the circulation of our actual printed newspaper has plummeted here and in every other city in the country. In Ohio, newspapers have responded to that in different ways. Has anyone seen the Cincinnati Enquirer lately? It is much smaller than the Dayton Daily News is. The Columbus Dispatch, the same thing. They went to a much smaller print size, not print size, but actual physical paper. If you know what our Go section looks like in the Dayton Daily News, the one you can fold open like this and is much smaller, that's the size of their entire paper. And so they have reduced their costs that way because they don't have as many people buying the paper. They don't have as much. They don't have anywhere near as much circulation revenue as they had. When you lose subscribers, you lose subscription revenue, and when you lose revenue, you have to cut staff, and it's just part of the business model. And so those Columbus and Cincinnati have shrunk the size of their paper. In Cleveland, the Cleveland Plain Dealer actually stopped delivering 7 days a week. Now, the Dayton Daily News still delivers 7 days a week, thus the middle name, Daily. If we actually stop delivering 7 days a week, could we still call ourselves the Dayton Daily News, or we would have to just call it what? The Dayton News? The Dayton Occasional News? The Dayton Couple Times a Week News? What would we be? But Cleveland, they no longer deliver to your home on the early part of the week, Monday, Tuesday. I think they deliver either 3 or 4 days a week now. Might be a good thing to look up. So that's how they save money and cut cost. They actually stopped publishing a few days a week. So you have these newspapers trying to deal with declining revenues from subscriptions, from people subscribing to the paper, by cutting back. Now, the newspapers also started losing another source of revenue, because we sell a lot of advertising in the paper, and we also used to sell a lot of classified advertising in the paper when people wanted to sell, dogs or advertise for a job or that sort of thing. Anyone ever heard of Craigslist? Because believe me, the Dayton Daily News has heard of Craigslist, and Craigslist took a bunch of money away from the Dayton Daily News over the course of several years. So we, classified ads used to be a nice big chunk of revenues coming in to us, and that disappeared with the advent of online. So what we had to do is we had to figure out, okay, our entire business model is changing. No one under the age of 30 or 40 reads the actual physical newspaper every day. How many here, and don't, be blunt, how many people here, do your parents get the newspaper at home at all during the week? Okay, yeah, close enough. The what?
It's like all my parents read, like they're so into the newspaper, like every day.
Tell me more, don't stop there. Come on, just say that again. In fact, just repeat that one more time,
like
will you?
My parents, all they do is like, I'll come home from school and they're just reading the paper, like that's all they're obsessed with. So
thank you.
Just have a few fans.
Thank you, right. Yeah. The Sunday? Yeah, absolutely, right. And if you were to move out or go to college or an apartment, do you think you would subscribe to the actual newspaper? No, no one under the age of, used to be 30, now it's probably 40, reads the actual physical newspaper every day anymore. There's a huge generational divide in how you folks get your news and how your parents get their news. Unless you sit, as soon as you come home, and when they're done with the sections of the paper, do they give them to you, and then you sit down and you read them for?
I'll read the sports section. And
there we go.
the
Okay.
life section and,
but you got to read the comics. The comics are fabulous. Bliss this morning in our paper was one of the funniest Bliss cartoons I've ever seen. But anyway, yeah. So that's the dilemma. The Dayton Daily News is like, what do we do now if we can't get revenue from subscriptions and from classified ads? Where do we get the money? Well, we got to capture your attention, and when there's a news story going on, we have to figure out a way to not make you, but for you to choose to come to us for news. So that means we have this website, which is our main, regular, relatively boring website. It has all the free local news on it. We also have a site that we call MyDaytonDailyNews.com. Come on. That has a little different look, and we try to put things on here that we're hoping that you might want to actually pay extra for. Our results on that have been a little mixed so far. It hasn't gone exactly the way we were hoping, but we have DaytonDailyNews.com. We have MyDaytonDailyNews.com. About a year ago, we launched Dayton.com, which is focused on entertainment, concerts, restaurants, going out to eat, festivals, everything along those lines. This site has gone pretty well, and we have a lot of restaurant-related news on here. Well, gee, there's a new fast pizza concept that opens today in Washington Township, down on 725 near Whole Foods. Wow. Okay. Rapid-fired pizza. Very good. Right. Well, yep. These are what's allowing us to stay in business here. This is, instead of getting the revenues that we talked about from subscriptions and classified ads, now we sell these kinds of ads, some of which are annoying. They come down and they block the page, and you think, all right, how do I get rid of this? And for a few seconds, we don't let you get rid of it, but eventually we do. And we also know that you, and now an increasing proportion of your parents' generation, and even like the really old people, like Mr. Hunnert, are now getting their news from social media. They're getting it from, you're on Twitter and Facebook more than you're looking at any of these sites that I just showed you, right? Is that a fair statement? Okay. So now we have a whole bunch of Facebook pages that are designed to grab your attention. This is a relatively new page. This is the inside of a Kroger store in Kettering, by the way, the produce section. And this would be a glass of beer from Worked Wing Brewery. And this would be inside a hospital at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And this would be one of the new buildings that's going up at the cornerstone of Centerville down there at Wilmington. So we are putting news stories on our Facebook page now. This was one we had on this morning's front page. If your parents, when you go home today, if they're reading the paper when you go home, this was our front page story today, and it's about how a lot of people are choosing to work part-time as opposed to working part-time only because they can't find a full-time job. It's an interesting story. A new golfing entertainment facilities going up down south. This was a story. We are so obsessed about getting stories first because we want you to come to our sites to read the news. And the only way to get you to come to our sites to read the news is if we get the story first. If we don't get the story first, you're going to be going on WDTN Channel 2's site instead of ours. And that would make us sad. Or you'll be going on some other site. So this story broke at 11:30 last night. And the reporter who wrote it sits right next to me at work. He actually commutes to work every day from northern Kentucky. This guy used to work at the Cincinnati Enquirer, but he got laid off. Why did he get laid off? Because of downsizing and convergence. So he lost his job at the Enquirer. He was out of work for a couple of years. Finally gets a job at the Dayton Daily News. He has a significant other down in northern Kentucky, so it's not a matter of just moving up to Dayton because she lives down there, works down there. So every day he makes that long, horrible drive up I-75 and then back home every day to northern Kentucky. He wrote this story, and this story broke at, let's see, this was posted at 10:58 p.m. last night. Whoop, get out there. And it was updated 15 minutes later at 11:13 p.m. And we got it first before any other news organization in town did. And when the story has to do with new jobs being created, that's an important story, especially with the way the economy's been the last 5 years.
Mark?
Yep.
Just
Please do.
Was that story shared with your partners then?
It was, yes.
WHIO?
It was, yes.
TV? Okay.
Yeah.
So at
Right.
during their 11 o'clock newscast, they were also carrying this story then, likely, or not?
Likely not, since we posted it at 10:58, but maybe. They probably did a very short version of it. But what happened was, this morning, there's a morning newscast on WHIO TV, Channel 7, and I didn't say this earlier, you may already know it. We share a newsroom. The Dayton Daily News shares a newsroom with WHIO TV. We're owned by the same company, and so, yes, I sit next to Mike Hartsock and James Brown and Cheryl McHenry, and yes, they're very normal people and wonderful people. And we share the same news gathering operation. So the stories we get, we share with them, and once in a blue moon, they'll come up with a story that we don't have.
My question was on the timing.
Yeah.
I noticed it's posted at 10:58, as if
Yeah.
it was almost too late for the TV.
No, that was not. That was coincidence this time. Around. Back in the old days, as you know, that would have been quite likely. But this morning, WHIO TV has a morning newscast, and so at 5 a.m. today, our WHIO TV reporter, Mike Campbell, whose sons went through Fairmont High School, was standing outside CareSource in downtown Dayton talking about this development. You see Georgia here, but actually a Dayton company is expanding in Georgia, and it's actually adding 100 jobs in Dayton and 200 down in Georgia. So we were so obsessed with getting that story first that my poor buddy Randy Tucker was working at 11 p.m. last night, and that doesn't happen all the time. Because I'm married to a high school teacher, I'm usually in bed asleep by 11 o'clock. So I'm glad this wasn't me. But this wasn't me.
Was he physically at?
He was not physically in Dayton. He was doing it from home. He was doing it remotely from home on his laptop and working with an editor up here. So that is so we're trying to get your attention here, and whoa, what's this? X out of it? Okay. Let's go back to Dayton Business and see what else we have here. So that CareSource story was quite an important one. You know, this touchscreen thing just does not want to agree with me. I refuse to bend to technology. There we go. Yeah. This was an interesting one. Does anybody know Double Days down here at Cross Point Center? Okay. Yeah. Well, they had a really good idea. They were going to open a second location. And the second location was down in Springboro, where there used to, you know, Dorothy Lane Market has 3 stores in town, and the one that's farthest south is in Springboro, way down there. And right outside of Dorothy Lane Market is this restaurant building that used to hold a restaurant called El Pueblo and Sammy's Gourmet Burgers and Beers or something like that. And Double Days signed a lease to open a new restaurant down there, a second location, but El Pueblo and Sammy's didn't move out when their lease was supposed to start. So that was a problem with the landlord, and so Double Days sued the landlord saying, hey, we signed a lease saying we could go in there on July 1st, and on July 1st, El Pueblo's and Sammy's was still operating in there. What's up with that? So they filed a lawsuit down in Warren County Common Pleas Court, and we wrote a story about it. And, oh, now, stop that. Continue to your first. No one's looked at any articles on here? Oh, my gosh, look at that. Look who wrote that story. Oh, my heavens. Yeah, exactly. Mike Fisher's my son, 2007 graduate. All right, yeah. Double Days. Well, look, look at that. That's some Mexican food there. Chuy's Tex-Mex.
Is it good?
Yeah. They opened down at Austin Landing, and now they're going to open their second location
At the mall?
over the Mall of Fairfield Commons. Not the Dayton Mall, but the Mall of Fairfield Commons. gears up for mid-November opening. They're hiring 175 people there, by the way. Mall at Fairfield Commons. Now I have your attention. Is that right? It's over at the Mall at Fairfield Commons. Wow, there's another Mark Fisher story. That Mark Fisher must have been on fire yesterday. What the heck? What the heck? Yes, I think so.
Oh.
I think so, yeah. Don't hold me to that. Whoops, whoops, whoops. There we go again. Touchscreen's killing me. What else do we have? What else do we have? Updating, generation. Nice little video there. Dayton Racino. Oh, Macy's. Macy's is going to close 35 to 40 stores. Wow, that's a lot of people are going to lose their jobs over that. If you worked at Macy's, that would be of tremendous interest to you. And yeah, we have Macy's here. There are 2 Macy's in town. Where are they? Anybody know where? Yep, the 2 malls. The 2 malls have Macy's. This story broke yesterday, right early in the morning yesterday. Oh my heavens! What the heck? That guy was on fire yesterday, Gary. How many? If I weren't here, I'd be back. I'd be writing all kinds of stories today. So we have this Dayton Business Facebook page, and we also have a. This is a Mark Fisher DDN page too. So this is not my personal page. This has a lot of the same restaurant-related stories on it, and this is the new this is the new restaurant that's opening up down across from Whole Foods. Does anyone know Sumera Sushi right up here on Far Hills? Okay, the guy who launched that restaurant, Ray Wiley, is also the founder of Hothead Burritos. Hothead Burritos now has restaurants all across the country, and where was its first one? Where was Hothead Burritos' first restaurant? Kettering, Ohio. Okay. Bam! Correct. Hothead Burritos. Same guy who founded Hothead Burritos also founded Sumera Sushi. The first one was it the one on Stroop, or was it the one?
It was the one on Smithville, I think.
Smithville, over by where the old Elder Beerman used to be. Yeah, Smithville, where Smithville and Wilmington come up. Yeah, I think that is it. So this is called Rapid Fired Pizza, and this is going to be, you can walk in and you can have them build your pizza for you, and it'll be cooked in 3 minutes.
So that was called
3 minutes. It's called Rapid Fired Pizza, and this opens today. Today, this is new news. See, news, new, today. And good heavens to Betsy, look who wrote that story. I mean, what the heck? All this is happening. All is happening.
He should get a raise.
Exactly. Couldn't agree more. Right.
Yeah, where's he at?
I needed a break after yesterday. My fingers, when you type like that, your fingers, yeah, bloody nubs is what my fingers are. That's right. Right. So. So exactly, carpal tunnel. So all those stories will appear in the Dayton Daily News, and what Gary was talking about earlier, what Mr. Hunter was talking about earlier, was there was a time earlier in my career where I could have written those stories, turned them in at the end of the day, and gone home. But in the case of each of those stories, they had to be posted online right away because when you're just publishing a newspaper that comes out one time a day in the morning, you can turn your stories in at 5 o'clock. The paper arrives at your doorstep in the morning, and it's so easy. But those stories had to be posted as soon as I heard about them and as soon as I was able to get the information, so that they were posted on our website and on our Facebook pages before they were on the pages of our competitors. Our competitors in this case were WDTN TV, Channel 2. What do they call on your Channel 2 on your side? What do they say? That's their slogan, I think. Channel 22 and Channel 45. Fox News Center 7 is WHIO TV, and they're the ones that were part of the same newsroom. There are also websites. There's a publication called Dayton Business Journal. That's my chief competitor on these kinds of stories. There's someone over there who covers the retail beat just like I do, and I try like crazy to get these stories before they do. And at the same time, they are trying like crazy to get these stories before I do. And so as soon as we get them, we have to sit down, write them right away, post them on our website, After they're posted on our website, we put them on our Facebook pages, and then we check our competitors' websites to see whether they beat us or whether we beat them. And that happens every day. And that is a total change from the way things worked when I first started getting into this industry. But we have to get people's loyalty to these pages. We have to train them that if they want to find out these stories first, they should check our page early and often, so that we can show them our advertising instead of their advertising, so that the newspaper can stay in business. And so that's an example of this convergence. And there's another place you see this downsizing and this convergence, and that's in the types of people we're hiring now. I would not get hired at the Dayton Daily News with the skill set that I had 5 years ago, because I couldn't do anything related to a web story or a news or a TV story or a radio story. Not only do we share a newsroom with WHIO TV, News Center 7, we also share it with WHIO Radio, 1290 and 95.7 WHIO Radio. So the journalists that we hire now are not just newspaper reporters. They can't be, because newspapers aren't, because none of you all are reading newspapers. So what's the point of us hiring people who just know how to write a newspaper story? We're hiring what they call all media journalists or multimedia journalists, either one, MMJs or AMJs, all media journalists. And these people, who are just a couple of years older than you, know how to put together a TV package, a TV broadcast TV story. They know how to put together a radio story, and they know how to work with audio. They know how to edit video, and at the end of the day, they can also write a decent news story for print, for the print editions of the Dayton Daily News. So it would be like, you're supposed to write a one-page paper from this presentation. My deepest sympathies to all of you. My deepest condolences about that. But what if you, instead of just writing that paper, had to also do a video presentation of my talk today? What would you do? Would you do a voiceover where your face is on camera talking about me talking? Or do you have a clip of me talking and then a clip of you talking too? Or do you also run some still photos in that video of things like that, a still photo of a big plate of very, very saucy spaghetti? And if so, how do you put all that together? And oh, by the way, you got to do it fast. You don't have the luxury of spending a week doing it. You got to have it done like in half an hour. Go right now. Go. And then when you're done with that, you also have to splice some audio together to make a radio story out of it. And then there are also then putting together a package for the web also has some certain intricacies and eccentricities that are not involved in the other two. The people we're hiring now are able to do all those things, and so people who just want to be writers, those who just want to write. I just want to write. I do not want to dirty my hands with anything else. I'm a pure writer, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to go into journalism. Good luck to you, pal, because no one's going to hire you if you have a very narrow, limited skill set. You have to have a much broader skill set these days, and Dayton is sort of at the forefront of this because we have the newspaper, the radio station, and the TV station all in one building, all in one newsroom. It's not like that in every city, but it's moving in that direction in every other city. In other cities, it's somewhat rare to have the TV station and the newspaper owned by the same company as Dayton has. But in other cities, it's becoming more, it's moving in that direction. And why? Because they have to figure out a way to become more efficient, to save money, And so you have newspaper reporters and TV reporters and our brand new all media journalists, that's AMJs, or multimedia journalists, that's MMJs. And I really don't know that there's a difference between the two. You have those people doing all of these kinds of stories and not just focusing on one or two. So, do any of you have questions? Because I need a drink of water now that you've got me all wired up and, you know, talking about the stories I wrote yesterday. I'm going to take a break, and somebody here, because y'all are reporters, one of you is going to ask me a question. Either that or I'm going to start picking on people. You don't want that to happen because, you know, Mrs. Fisher, my wife, Mrs. Fisher, the math teacher, has taught me how to do that, and I can be just as evil as she can on that. Now, go ahead.
When you like find a story to like write about, before like posting it anywhere, do you have like someone proofread it?
That is an excellent question. That is an excellent question. And there's not a simple yes or no answer to that. It used to be, when I was writing for the traditional newspaper, that every story I wrote was read by 5 or 6 people, and they were editing it, they were correcting my grammatical errors. I don't make many, but I do make some. And they're checking it for accuracy, and they're double checking the spellings of the names of the people I have in there, the addresses. They're double checking everything. 5 or 6 different pairs of eyes on every story that I wrote, back in the good old days when we had a huge staff of people. Nowadays, not so much. Nowadays, because of the demand to get the story online quickly and before the competitors do, those filters are really no longer around. What I write for the web does not see anyone editing it at all. That's my raw copy on there, which is a little scary. I've made some boo-boos. The good thing about web stories is that you can get in there and you can fix them right away. Unlike the days when if you made a mistake in the newspaper, it couldn't be fixed. It was there. It was burned into that paper, and the only way to fix it would be to write a correction that would run in the next day's paper, 24 hours later, or 5 days later, depending on when we learned of the mistake. But now, so we are writing really the first draft of history here. It may be the history of Chewy's Mexican restaurant, but it's still history. And mistakes will often appear in the first draft that shows up. And then usually, I've had people email me and say, essentially, dude, look at what you wrote. Look at that. Look at how you spelled that word, or look at that, you know, that sentence that you wrote that made no sense. And I will look at the story and I will go, oh, I will hang my head in shame. I will recognize that hundreds of people are reading my story and that my story has my name on it and it has this horribly embarrassing mistake. And I'll get in there and fix it right away, and it'll be fixed before it actually sees print. Yeah, you had a question.
So when you say that nowadays, these newspapers are more concerned about how quickly they get out more, how accurate they are?
Hopefully, it's not either or. Hopefully, you can be quick and accurate, but my answers have to do with more along the stories that I'm doing here, which tend to be quick breaking news stories. The Dayton Daily News also does big, long investigative stories, big, long investigative pieces about military, military health care and other things. That those stories, I take back what my answer to you was. We still have newspaper stories that see 10 or 12 people reading through them, looking for mistakes, and occasionally attorneys looking through them to make sure that we're not going to get sued about some of the things we're writing. The Dayton Daily News still does those kinds of stories. Generally, they run on Sunday mornings in the Sunday paper. Those stories are gone. We have editors go through those with a fine-tooth comb. But in these kinds of 4 or 5 paragraph stories that relate to breaking news, a new restaurant opening, a restaurant closing, restaurants suing their landlords, it is more important to get it fast. Hopefully we're not sacrificing accuracy to do that, but we're getting it up there first. And if there's a mistake in it, we'll fix it 10 minutes later. So if we're sacrificing accuracy for speed, it's not a total turning our back on accuracy. It's the importance of getting it up there first.